Welcome to Disrupt Education. Tom is our guest today. Tom, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
Let's dive in first by telling a little bit more about who you are. You wear many hats across education and have done a lot of things. So tell the listeners, who is Tom Liam Lynch?
Look, I've been in public ed for about 18 years now, and I was an English teacher for a number of years. I then transitioned to overseeing a large-scale online learning program for New York City public schools way before the pandemic, over a decade ago. During that time, I did my doctorate in English education. I moved into becoming an ed tech professor, where I taught pre-service teachers for over 7 years while doing a lot of coaching at schools around literacy and tech and leadership. And then most recently, I pivoted into the nonprofit space, and I'm right now editor-in-chief of a website called InsideSchools, which is pretty popular in New York City to New York City families. And I also serve as ed policy director at the Center for New York City Affairs. But on the nights and weekends, I've got this passion project that I have not been able to shake, called Plotting Plots, and it revolves around trying to bridge the worlds of computer science and teaching English.
That is something that I can't wait to start talking about, because I'm very interested in the way that we start pulling down these silos. But before we go there, as my listeners know, I always ask my guests, okay, your educational path, what kind of student was Tom, and all the way through your PhD, if you can take us through that journey.
Yeah, I didn't identify as a student necessarily early on. I had a lot of instability at home growing up. There was alcoholism, there was mental health issues, there was divorce. And so, for me, I think the school was just a place that wasn't home. It was a safe space. And I didn't necessarily throw myself into my learning. My older sister was a phenomenal learner. And so I do think that influenced me quite a bit. But I did as well as I could. I was perfectly happy with a B, and as long as I felt like it was a fair grade, I was fine with it. When I went on to high school, actually, I fell in love with English and with language in a certain kind of way. For me too, around that time, maybe a little earlier, late middle school, I was identified as not a STEM kid. And I remember that. I remember a teacher sort of offhandedly sort of saying that, oh, well, your strength is the humanities, or your strength is whatever. I thought nothing of it. And in fact, it colored the way I thought of myself, I think, throughout a significant portion of my learning journey. But in retrospect, it bothers me a lot. And I did a lot of music in high school and loved performance of all types. As I moved into college, I was a train wreck my first year, of undergrad. It was just trying to figure out life and balancing schedules and all this. I didn't do too well at all. I knew I had a singing scholarship to college, so I was kind of focused on that. I got, disenchanted by that, and then went liberal arts. But I transferred about halfway through my sophomore year, and that transfer, I think, for me, marked a moment of intentionality, unlike other kind of educational transition points. I was no longer focused on music. I was broadening out into especially philosophy and English. And the decision to switch universities, I was commuting then upon that because I was trying to save money from living on campus. A switch flicked for me, and I was like, I think I can actually do this really well. I'd always done well enough, but it was I think I can actually focus on this and do this differently. And I remember there was one dude in one of my classes. It was a philosophy seminar. I don't remember which philosopher it was on, but this student across the table from me, there was only 6 of us in the class. He annotated his readings like no one I'd ever seen in my life. He was the most meticulous reader. And as a result, the connection I made in that semester was the meticulousness of his reading enabled these brilliant ideas to emerge in our conversations. And again, like I probably experienced that tons of times in my life, but it was the first time I recognized it. And so I did really well in undergrad, went on to grad school to become an English teacher. While I was teaching, started my doctorate at Teachers College at Columbia. And, and I'd say as a learner in that setting, I have a very hard time, which I think will become evident as our conversation continues. I have a very hard time like fitting into boxes. So, the path I took, it was an English education program, which is different than literacy, which is different than education as a social science. English ed is like a combination of of humanistic inquiry and also the social sciences. And it gave me a lot of creative room to explore methodologies that are, not typically associated with like social science research. So whether it was narrative inquiry, deep qualitative methods, things like that. And that played to my strengths like immensely. So I've come to appreciate the fact that however I'm wired or however I was kind of put here, I really thrive when I don't have to fit into a particular box, but can explore and expand and ask questions and things like that.
That's going to resonate with so many high school students because honestly, I love the way that you put that because I just talked to a few students this morning who, they're in their 12th year of public school and they're like, I don't know what I want to do. And it's okay, right? It's okay not to be put into a box, but to explore. I love the fact that you kind of looked into that. And now it's actually when somebody said, you're not STEM, well, you're doing something there, especially with plotting plots. Tell us a little bit about plotting plots, your nights and weekends, and how this, it drives us. I know these are side hustles that we do as educators and educational leaders. Tell us unpack that a little bit. If plotting plots, what is it? And I'm sure I have some follow-up questions.
Yeah. Thanks so much for that question and for giving me a chance to talk about it. It is one of those things you do on your own and you get a little bit of traction, then it goes away, then it comes back and it goes away. So I appreciate that. So plotting plots, it grew out of, a lot of it was my earlier like research as a professor where I do conceptual work really well. A lot of that is the philosophy background that I have. And I was fascinated by something I had learned when I was working for the New York City Department of Education on a large scale online learning project. And in this role, it was a little bit of product development, sort of working with the IT team and some third party folks and the education stakeholders to create this platform for online learning for New York City. And as I was sitting at these tables over and over again, I started to realize when these IT guys are talking about developing an app or software or whatever it might be, I've gotten more and more curious about what they're doing. And when I look over their shoulders and ask them about what they're doing, they're writing. It's language. And so it started to occur to me, especially as an English teacher, that all of these phrases and terms that seem so opaque and distant from who I am, like software development, applications, database, APIs, every time, even API, which sounds like some sort of sci-fi villain, right? Even API, it's language. And so I got really interested in that and it never left me. So when I became a professor, I did a deep dive into software theory and software studies to just try to understand what the nature of software is. And again, a lot of that's super philosophical. A lot of it comes out of media studies. And I just kept finding over and over again that that when we say digital, what we actually mean is language. Digitality is linguistic, period. And the moment you recognize that, the moment you acknowledge that, and it's the reason your phone updates. When your phone updates, it's like software is rewriting itself. It's the moment you acknowledge it, it means that this division between STEM and the humanities crumbles. It falls apart. And I was fascinated by that, especially around that time as Computer Science for All were starting to launch. And I started to see all the funding and the enthusiasm and the energy behind this work. And I was like, why aren't English teachers at the table? Like, especially if when we talk about computer science, talk about digitality, like it's all language. So where are the English teachers? Why are we just talking to STEM teachers? And so a lot of the plotting plots were kind of grew from there, in terms of that, some of those early observations. And then I started kind of piecing together these sorts of like, sort of principles along the way of like digital is language, and STEM and the humanities are not distinct. They're part of the same thing, things like that.
As an educator in a little bit of coding realms at the secondary level, and even some website development and things like that, right? And I'm speaking in layman's terms around education here, but one of the things that we're always told is, all right, well, how do you connect literacy? And I'll be honest, before I even kind of met you and went into plotting plots, I didn't really understand this because it was all technical writing to us. Mm-hmm. It was like, okay, well, your students are just technical writing, and it was very separated. I had no idea, and that's what fascinated me about plotting plots as well, because when I started reading some of the pieces, it was like the sun is shining in. It's like, wait a minute, yeah. How do you see something like this going forward? Because I really, I know in secondary education, what we struggle with is pulling down these silos, right? Everything intertwines in some way or another. But we always think everything is itself, right? So English to me is still, in many ways, unfortunately, let's read Catcher in the Rye, and then let's write something about it. And then let's read some Shakespeare, and then let's write something about it. But it goes way deeper than that. Mm-hmm. As a student of life, I can imagine myself seeing how it connects with the robotic arm, the if-then statements back in the 90s. Right. But where do you see this going, and how maybe has it helped kind of disrupt the regular ways of thinking in education?
I guess for those who haven't seen plotting plots, and you should check out the website, right? It's like I try to make literary data available and accessible to readers. So if you're reading a book, you can look up some keywords and you can see on a simple line chart, like this is how frequently the names like Harry, Ron, and Hermione were used in Harry Potter. And from that, like the value of it isn't just in that. The value is in looking at that visualization and then posing new kinds of questions about the text based on patterns you would not have seen and could not really have seen otherwise. And so, like, I do think that there's so much potential for this work. I know I'm fond of saying in different settings that like there are two problems, especially with computer science education in the US. The first problem is computer, and the second problem is science. We have to move beyond, because all it does is perpetuate that false dichotomy between STEM and the humanities. And it helps absolutely not only does it not help anyone, it's untrue. So we have to really move beyond that. And I think when we do, I think we can embrace a term I'm more fond of, which is computationality. Computationality is human. Like, to compute is human, but more than just that, like, especially for ELA teachers and in humanistic settings, like we have so much to contribute to this work that is going untapped. Even the earliest forms of writing were actually like to calculate and tally numbers and quantities of things. The etymology of the word technology, techne, is the same root as text. Like, the synergies between these worlds like are already there. They're there in our own words and lexicon and language. And so we have to acknowledge that. And I think when we do, and when we embrace computationality in all subjects, I think we open up just so many new possibilities. For ELA, for English, I think there's actually some huge steps that we can take just in embracing literary data in the classroom. The idea that if you're already teaching a particular work, what does it mean to also include the literary data or a visualization that's been pre-created for you to help students and the teacher kind of, again, pose new questions about the text? And that's something that I think often gets overlooked, like with the way computer science rolls out right now. It becomes about imposing CS like into a classroom setting, into a content area in a way that is inauthentic to that content area. This is especially true for secondary teachers. Middle and high school teachers identify with their content area, especially high school teachers. And so if we can do more to honor that instead of challenge that, I think we get further faster. So for example, in ELA, what does it mean to use computational methods to deepen and expand the study of literature? That's the question. Like, the work is about the heart and soul of ELA class. And part of that is studying literature and making meaning from texts. So how do we use computational methods to do that in radically different ways, but that also double down and kind of support what the English teachers already know and are on the hook for with their supervisors? That's okay to take those kinds of tacks. I think there's an equity case to be made too for computationality across content areas. When it comes to, we hear equity arguments in computer science often, and it's especially, around concerns for children in poverty and of color, for girls and young women and their exposure to CS. And what I find interesting about that is, like, if computationality or computer science, if you prefer that term, if it is as important as one thinks it is for economic reasons, for civic reasons, then it is vital that we expose every child in this country in creative and critical ways to computationality. But most districts don't have the room or the budget or the staff to offer CS. And so instead of fighting that or fighting for the funding for dedicated CS, and that can be part of it, but why aren't we just talking about helping all content area teachers, especially core teachers, embed computationality into their practice in ways, again, that reinforces the heart and soul of their disciplines anyway? When we do that, we do two things. One, we help ensure that computationality is provided, that exposure to computationality is provided for all students, regardless of whether you're in that special CS class or not, or you were able to sign up for the after-school robotics club, whatever. Everybody gets it because it's in those core content areas and it's embedded in. But the second thing that it does, if we embed computationality into content areas, is it also makes it more sustainable. So if this is a matter of equity, we need to make sure that everyone gets it always. If it's at that level, then we need to make sure that if and when the enthusiasm from the private sector, from the philanthropic sector, if and when that dries up for computer science, we're not left without the resources to sustain the work. So by building capacity for content area teachers to embed computer science or computationality into their practice in a way that deepens and expands their content area instruction, by doing that, we also help ensure that this work can sustain over time as well.
Post-pandemic, right? We were coming out of where this is actually embedded in the lives of students, and teachers and educators, whether they know it or not, right? Are we at the right time to this pivot to happen? I mean, as you were saying that, I'm thinking, okay, yes, it's a language. It's underneath, and language can be very, very personal. You can learn, even on the data points, and everything revolves around language. But now we're back, we don't want any more technology or whatever. I feel like what you just said actually makes sense in a transition of actually moving forward. What are your feelings about that? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it could. Like, again, I think it's, I think there is a linguistic quality to computer science and computationality, like, for sure. But there's also, again, like, once we pull down some of these silos and these dichotomies, like, it also just allows us to, like, we open up pedagogical possibilities, and it's like, and so this is a world where you can fuse qualitative and quantitative, and letters and numbers, and imagination and information, and inquiries and queries. Like, these are things that fuse together when we allow these silos to dissipate. I think as we're talking about post-pandemic, I think one of the great challenges we're going to face right now is that that computationality and CS, it all gets lumped into that STEM box still, And you know what else is over there? Online learning or digital learning. So anything that's tech, anything that plugs in to something is considered tech. And we have a risk of tech fatigue and of also conflating different uses of technology together in ways that are inaccurate, inappropriate, and unhelpful. So then I think districts all across the country are facing that right now a bit. I think if we do take an approach where we're talking about embedding computationality into content areas, I do think that helps. It actually keeps the work in the content areas where I would argue it belongs greatly. And also it can help, I think, for districts who are struggling with this or teachers who are struggling with this, where they're like, I don't know how to make the case. I know there's value in this kind of work, but I don't know how to make the case for it. Like one of the key ways to start to address learning loss with students and to re-engage students is to take interdisciplinary approaches to things. And that's what this is inherently. It's about embracing computational methods and computationality in the service of humanistic inquiry. So I do think that there's an awful lot of potential here. I'm hearing more than ever before. I'm hearing outreaches every week from people who are kind of struggling with the ELA question, as one person put it to me. And I think that the field is starting to recognize that we can't just count on STEM to do this. And I would say it's beyond. There's more than just a practical reason. There's an awful lot about the very nature of digital technologies, of software applications, of the way in which digital platforms are operating in the world. Think about some of the things that have happened in the last 18 months that have been facilitated by digital platforms, from health to civic to commerce, you name it. We need young people and teachers. We need young people who are growing up with these technologies in ways that put the humanistic first, actually. That isn't technical first, but it's what's the ethical implication of that thing that you could design and build? What are the legal implications? What are the creative and moral and implications of some of these things? These are questions that the next generation needs to be fluent in when it comes to engaging in computational and digital spaces. And the place where those questions are being posed expertly throughout the country is in the humanities classrooms. And so, we should, math teachers, science teachers, your CS teachers, you're welcome to the table. But you know what? The other half of it should be made up of the ELA teachers, social studies teachers, foreign language teachers. Why are they not at the table more often in districts and schools to give input on, even if you just want to approach computer science as coding? Why don't you have your foreign language teacher there? So I do think that there's a lot of possibility moving forward. The emphasis on computer science in any district or school is going to very likely be less than it has been in the past. And so the more that we can see how these sorts of approaches and concepts can reinforce, the things that really matter to us in this moment and moving forward, I think the better we'll be.
If you're a school and let's just say you're the leader, right? And it's just you're a traditional school, you have, and I'll say secondary ed. What are maybe some of the first steps in order to start moving in this direction? What would you suggest to a school leader? Maybe one or two things to just, let's start opening the door to this.
I think it's really important to ask fundamental questions with your team and your staff about what is computer science? Why do we think any of this is important or valuable in the first place? How does it complement some of the things that we're already doing in our school? I think that those kinds of fundamental questions are actually really, really important. Do not assume that computer science is worth your time at all. I think it is. Don't get me wrong. Do not assume that it is. Have the conversation, sit with your most trusted people, pull in the person who's always the naysayer, all right, and have them all sit down and discuss what makes computer science or computationality, why is this something that we should waste our time and money on in the first place anyway? And do yourselves the service of defining that purpose for yourselves. Don't let some external organization tell you. that computer science is important. Don't let the state tell you, like, why. It's something very similar. We see this in ELA classrooms often too. It's like ELA teachers, they often they'll have assumptions about why they're doing what they're doing in the classroom, but they don't step back and ask, like, why is it important in society to learn to read? Why is it important to write? Like, these are fundamental questions that are not intellectual exercises. They create visions, and they create missions, and they create North Stars. And if you don't take the time to sit back and to actually have those kinds of conversations, you'll get some better or worse version of going through the motions, and it ain't worth it. I would recommend checking out Plotting Plots. I'm not the only show in town, but there's some smart work there. I've got a couple books that are out. There's one around integrating computer science into K-12 schools and districts. The whole premise of that book is that you know more than you think, and the computer scientists and the K-12 computer science educators don't know as much as they sound like they do. Like, that's the premise of the book. And then it goes in and tries to make it really, really accessible, because the goal isn't to create a pipeline for Google. That's not my goal. And that's not really the ultimate goal, I don't think, of computer science education in the United States. That might be part of it. But our ultimate goal has to be, in my mind, has to be civic first. Like, we vote through electronic means increasingly. We consume media that is mediating our society. Like, we have to have a more critical understanding of the fact that these digital tools, I'm using air quotes for those who can't see, like, these digital tools are language, and it's not enough just to say that. The implication of these digital tools being language is that they are written by people. And just like anything you've ever written in your life, it could have been written differently, and it wasn't. And there was a reason that a company or a developer or somebody chose not to write that piece of software that way. And we need young people and teachers to be growing up aware of that, critically aware of that, and knowing how to spot, these kinds of, whether they're biases or imperfections or whatever it might be, in the very tools that we use, so that we have some hope of curtailing and keeping in check, some of the injustices of that can emerge from those kinds of decisions.
I'm going to have to take a moment and soak that in, because it's almost a worldview change that you've described. And well, it is actually for a lot of traditional educators. I want to give you a chance. Where can people find you and the website to Plotting Plots? And, obviously we'll list your books. I've dabbled into a few of them. Very interesting. I love the way it actually is bringing down silos. It's truly, honestly, Tom, putting the human first. And I think that's what everybody's trying to do, but they don't really realize, and this might be a starting point for them. Yeah, how can people connect with you?
Thanks. I love connecting. So you can find me online at Tom Liam Lynch on most channels. I got in there early on that. My website's at tomliamlynch.com. Plottingplots.com is where you'll find all of this work that we've been referring to today. But I genuinely enjoy when people reach out, when they have questions, when they're struggling with something. Like, I love it. So I welcome any sort of connection there, and I'm happy to help any way I can.
Tom, thank you so much for hanging out with us on Disrupt Education, telling us your learning journey, and going deep into computationality. Is that where we're at? Yes.
There you go.
So, I'm wondering if I can kind of ease that into my own curriculum and curriculum directors of my school. Thank you again for hanging out with us.
Thanks so much for having me.
And thank you all, listeners. We appreciate you. We'll catch you next time on Disrupt Education.